breaking the horizon. Ayana had always felt the weight of tradition pressing down on her. Growing up on a reservation in Washington state, she had learned early that her life was to follow a certain path. Her family had plans for her, a life where she would marry a man from the community, start a family, and continue the ancient customs that had been passed down for generations. But Ayana's heart had other plans. When she received a scholarship to Washington State University, it was like a breath of fresh air. It was her chance to explore the world beyond the reservation, even if it was met with resistance from her family. They saw it as a stepping stone to a future they envisioned, not one that Ayana secretly longed for. In her first week at the dorm, Ayana met Harper, a girl from Seattle who was studying environmental science. Harper was bold and lively, with a sparkle in her eyes that instantly drew Ayana in. They were roommates by chance, but from the moment they started talking, they knew their connection was something special. Harper's curiosity about Ayana's culture and background sparked conversations that often lasted deep into the night. As they spent more time together, their friendship blossomed into something more. Late-night study sessions turned into shared meals, which turned into hand-holding during long walks through campus. Soon, Ayana couldn't deny the truth. She was falling in love with Harper. Harper felt the same, and as they grew closer, their love for each other became undeniable. But Ayana's family was a different story. During breaks, when Ayana would visit her reservation, her mother would ask her about boys, subtly pushing her towards dating someone appropriate. The pressure was suffocating. Ayana knew her family wouldn't understand her feelings for Harper. They were traditional, and anything outside the norm was seen as a threat to their way of life. One evening, during winter break, Harper visited the reservation for the first time. The visit was uncomfortable, to say the least. Ayana's parents were polite but distant, sensing there was more to Harper's presence than just a friend. Her father especially began making subtle comments about finding a good man and continuing the family line. Ayana couldn't stand it anymore. That night, after Harper left, Ayana confronted her parents. "I'm not looking for a boyfriend. I'm in love with someone and she's a woman," Ayana said, her voice shaking but firm. The words hung in the air like a thundercloud. Her mother gasped, and her father stood still, his face darkening with disapproval. The next few hours were a blur of arguments, tears, and ultimatums. Ayana was given a choice: either follow the path they had laid out for her or risk being cut off from her family. It was the hardest decision Ayana had ever faced. Her love for her family and culture ran deep, but her love for Harper was unlike anything she had ever known. Harper, ever supportive, told Ayana that they would find a way together, no matter what. When graduation came, the pressure from Ayana's family reached its peak. They pushed her harder to settle down, to leave her university life behind, and return to the reservation. But Ayana knew she couldn't go back, not when her heart was pulling her in another direction. One night, after a long and painful conversation with her family, Ayana made her choice. She packed her things and met Harper in the dorm room they had shared for the past 4 years. "Let's go," Ayana whispered, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. Harper nodded, having already sensed that this moment would come. With nothing but the essentials packed, Ayana and Harper left Washington behind, driving north into the unknown. Alaska seemed like a dream, a place where they could build a life together, free from judgment, free from expectations. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew that as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. Their first night in Alaska, They found a small cabin to rent, tucked away in the woods with the northern lights flickering above. The cold air bit at their skin, but inside the cabin, they were warm, wrapped in each other's arms. They were finally free. Ayana knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. She still loved her family and missed them every day, but in her heart, she believed that one day they would come to accept her and Harper for who they were. Until then, she would create her own path, one where love transcended boundaries and where she and Harper could build a future together under the wide, open skies of Alaska. Breaking the Horizon, Part 2. Ayana and Harper had found temporary peace in Alaska, but the weight of Ayana's family's rejection lingered like a shadow. Every day, Ayana felt the ache of missing her home, the reservation where she had grown up, a place that had once been filled with warmth, laughter, and tradition. But now it was a place she was no longer welcome. Ayana's father, Chief Tejano, was a stern man of few words, but his silence had always carried authority. He was deeply rooted in the traditions of their people, a protector of their culture, and he expected his children to uphold those values. Her mother, Sage, was gentler but equally bound by tradition. Sage had always been the one to make sure the family stayed close, weaving together generations through ceremony and storytelling. Ayana had always felt a special connection with her, but the revelation of her love for Harper had shattered that bond. Her parents couldn't understand how Ayana, their eldest daughter, could forsake what they considered the natural order of life: marriage to a man from the community, raising children who would continue their lineage. The day Ayana told them she was leaving for Alaska with Harper, her father's words were cold, sharp as broken glass. "You leave this land, you leave us," he had said, his back turned to her as if she had already become a ghost in their lives. Her younger brother, Kale, and her sister, Mahina, had both been silent during the confrontation, but their eyes were filled with sadness. Ayana knew they wanted to support her, but the weight of tradition and the pressure from their parents were too much. She could no longer return to the place where she had spent her childhood. The reservation was no longer her home. With her family rejecting her, Ayana also faced financial hardship. Her parents had supported her through college, and without their help, she and Harper struggled to make ends meet in Alaska. The job market was sparse, and Ayana's degree in anthropology, though meaningful to her, did little to provide financial stability. They took on odd jobs, waitressing, cleaning cabins, and working in small shops, just to cover rent and basic necessities. Some nights, dinner was little more than canned beans and bread. There were moments when Ayana considered returning to the reservation, begging for forgiveness, but the thought of betraying her love for Harper made her stomach churn. In contrast, Harper's situation, though also fraught with challenges, seemed different. Harper's mother, Elizabeth, was a single parent who had raised Harper in the heart of San Francisco. She was a driven woman, a successful lawyer, and had always envisioned a particular future for her daughter. Elizabeth wanted Harper to follow in her footsteps, to return to San Francisco after graduation and join a prestigious law firm. When Harper told her mother that she was moving to Alaska with Ayana, Elizabeth's disappointment was palpable. "You're throwing away your future for a relationship? You have a life waiting for you here, Harper," Elizabeth had said, her voice cold but not unkind. She didn't reject Harper outright, but there was an undeniable rift between them. Unlike Ayana's family, Harper's mother didn't forbid her from coming home, but her disappointment was like a heavy cloud that loomed over every phone call, every rare visit. Elizabeth couldn't understand why Harper would choose a life of uncertainty in a remote part of the world over the security and prestige of a career in San Francisco. In Alaska, Harper found solace in nature, in the quiet beauty of the wilderness. But Ayanna felt the pull of home every day. She missed the sound of her father's deep voice chanting during ceremonies, her mother's hands weaving baskets, and the laughter of her siblings around the dinner table. She missed the land, the smells of the pine trees, and the rushing river. But every time she thought about returning, she remembered her father's words, the finality of his rejection. She couldn't go back. Ayanna tried reaching out to her family, writing letters to her mother and siblings, explaining that her love for Harper was real, that it wasn't a phase or a rebellion, but something deep and true. The letters went unanswered. Phone calls were met with silence or, worse, a harsh reminder from her father that she was no longer part of their world. They wouldn't let her return to the reservation, wouldn't let her attend ceremonies or even visit during holidays. It was as if she had never existed. The financial strain continued to weigh on them both. Harper took a job as a park ranger, but the pay wasn't much. They couldn't afford health insurance, and the thought of any emergency terrified them. Ayanna sold some of the traditional jewelry she had made during her time on the reservation, but it was never enough. The stress of surviving in a place so far from what they had known began to take its toll. Despite all the hardships, Ayanna and Harper found strength in each other. On cold nights, when the world seemed too heavy to bear, they would sit outside, under the blanket of stars, and talk about their dreams. They imagined a future where they could visit both of their families without judgment, where Ayanna's parents would accept Harper as part of the family, and where Harper's mother would be proud of the life they had built. One day, Ayanna received a letter, not from her parents, but from her sister, Mahina. It was short, barely 2 paragraphs, but it held a glimmer of hope. Mahina wrote that she missed Ayanna every day and that, though she couldn't go against their parents, she believed that one day things might change. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep Ayanna going. Harper, too, found small victories with her mother. Elizabeth had softened slightly, sending care packages with warm clothes and food during the coldest months. It wasn't an apology or acceptance, but it was a start. Harper never pressured Ayanna to reach out to her family, but she always reminded her that love, though hard, was worth fighting for. In the end, Ayanna knew that the road ahead would be long, that her family might never fully accept her love for Harper. But as she stood on the edge of a vast, untamed landscape, hand in hand with the woman she loved, she realized that she had already broken free from the expectations that had bound her for so long. Together, they would face whatever came next, just as they had done since the day they decided to run away to Alaska. They had each other, and for now, that was enough. Breaking the Horizon, Part 3. The first 6 months in Alaska had brought both moments of peace and overwhelming hardship for Ayanna and Harper. The vast, wild landscape offered a refuge where they could breathe deeply, where the outside world seemed far away. But soon, they discovered that even in the remote corners of Alaska, judgment and intolerance could find them. The small Alaskan town where they lived was a close-knit community, and for a while, Ayanna and Harper were just 2 new faces, welcomed with curious smiles and small talk. People here valued hard work, and the couple quickly became part of the routine, Harper working as a park ranger and Ayanna taking jobs wherever she could. They were hopeful that this could be the place where they could finally build a life free from judgment. But the illusion of safety didn't last long. It started with whispers. At the local store, when Ayana went to buy supplies, she noticed the way the cashier's smile faltered when Harper came in behind her. At first, Ayana thought she was imagining it, but then the cold stares began. Harper's colleagues, once friendly, became distant. Conversations abruptly ended when she approached. The sense of community they had initially felt began to dissolve. One day, while Ayana was working in the small gift shop selling her handmade jewelry, an elder woman from the town came in. She examined Ayana's work silently before asking, "You're the one living with that girl, right? Your people don't allow this, do they? How do you think we feel about it here?" The comment hit Ayana like a punch in the gut. She had heard similar words from her own family, but to hear them again from a stranger in this new place reopened the wounds she was trying so hard to heal. The woman's voice was cold, laced with a quiet but undeniable disdain. Ayana didn't respond, simply stared at the floor as the woman left. But the words echoed in her mind, louder and louder. They couldn't escape it. Not here. Not anywhere. That night, as they lay in bed, Ayana turned to Harper. "It's happening again." Harper's face tightened with a knowing look. She had felt it too. "Yeah, I've noticed. The guys at work barely talk to me anymore. I overheard one of them say something about how we don't need people like that here." Ayana let out a bitter laugh. "People like us. It doesn't matter where we go, does it?" They had come to Alaska hoping for a fresh start, but it was becoming clear that even here, in the rugged wilderness, they were outsiders. The whispers grew louder, the stares colder. Ayana's hours at the gift shop were reduced without explanation, and Harper was passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified coworkers. Even the local tribal council, a group of Native Alaskans whom Ayana had hoped would be more understanding of her background, seemed distant. It became clear that the same prejudices they had tried to escape were rooted even in this seemingly open land. The small town's traditional values, much like those of Ayana's own tribe, were conservative, and the sight of two women living together as a couple wasn't something that fit into their worldview. One evening, Ayana returned home to find a small group of people standing outside their cabin, speaking in hushed tones. She couldn't make out their words, but the glares they cast her way told her everything she needed to know. Ayana rushed inside, locking the door behind her. Her heart raced, but she kept her fear bottled up. She didn't want Harper to see how shaken she was. But Harper noticed. "What happened?" Harper asked, standing from the kitchen table where she'd been reading. "People," Ayana muttered, her voice hollow. "They were outside, watching me." Harper crossed the room quickly and wrapped her arms around Ayana. They stood there for a moment, holding each other as the tension hung heavy in the air. "They won't stop, will they?" Harper whispered, her voice filled with frustration. "It's always going to be like this." Ayana pulled away slightly, looking into Harper's eyes. "I don't know what to do anymore. We came here thinking we could finally be free, but it's like we can't outrun it. My family, this town, everyone..." Harper's jaw tightened. "Maybe it's time we leave. Maybe Alaska isn't the answer." Ayana didn't say anything for a long time. They had worked so hard to make this life here, and yet the idea of leaving again, starting over in another place, was both exhausting and tempting. But where would they go? Where in the world could they find peace? The next few weeks were unbearable. Ayana found an anonymous note shoved under their door one morning. It was crudely written, a single sentence that cut deep. "You don't belong here." Harper, ever the optimist, tried to brush it off, but Ayanna saw the fear in her eyes. The stares at the store grew more hostile. One day, Harper's car was vandalized, the windows broken, and a slur etched into the side with a knife. The message was clear. Ayanna and Harper were no longer welcome. They sat together in their tiny cabin that evening, the silence between them thick with the weight of all the unspoken fears. "I think we need to go," Ayanna said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't live like this. Not again." Harper nodded, her eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. "I've been thinking the same thing. But where do we go? My mom still wants me to move back to San Francisco, but I know it won't be any better there. She's disappointed in me for not following her plan, and I can't go back to being the person she wants me to be." Ayanna sighed. "I don't know where we'll go, but we can't stay here. Not when people are watching us like we're some kind of threat." They decided to leave Alaska, but the uncertainty of their future loomed large. They had little money saved, no clear destination, and no family support. But they had each other. That had always been enough. As they packed their few belongings, Ayanna felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't the life she had imagined, but it was hers. It was real. She thought about her family, about the words her father had spoken that day she left the reservation. She had been rejected by her people, by strangers, but the love she had found with Harper was worth fighting for. Maybe they wouldn't find acceptance in the next place they went, but they would keep moving forward, together, breaking through each barrier that came their way. Breaking the Horizon. Part 4. Ayanna had always been close to her younger brother, Tahoma. He was the only person in her family who never judged her, never tried to mold her into something she wasn't. Growing up, he would follow her everywhere, copying her every move, from climbing trees to sitting beside her when she beaded jewelry. He admired her strength and independence, but after she left the reservation, their communication had all but ceased. It wasn't out of anger, but because Ayanna couldn't bear to hear the pain in his voice, pain that was too tangled in the expectations of their family. Tahoma had always been more traditional than Ayanna, more willing to follow their parents' wishes, but he also loved his sister deeply. When she disappeared after leaving the reservation, he couldn't let go of the idea that somehow, someday, he would find her. While Ayanna tried to erase traces of herself, deleting old accounts and moving to Alaska, Tahoma searched. It took him months, but one day, while scrolling through the few remaining links to Ayanna's life, he found her social media. She had posted a picture of the Alaskan mountains, and though her face wasn't in the photo, Tahoma knew it was her. He could feel it in his bones. Determined, Tahoma borrowed a truck and left the reservation. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, especially not their parents. His mother and father had hardened their hearts after Ayanna left, speaking of her as though she was a ghost, a daughter they once had but no longer recognized. Tahoma hated it. He couldn't accept that Ayanna was lost to them forever. She was still his sister, and he needed to bring her back. It was a long drive to the small Alaskan town, but Tahoma pushed through the exhaustion. He spent the last few hours of the trip thinking about the man their parents had chosen for her. His name was Samuel, a strong, respected man in the tribe, someone who could bring honor to the family. Tahoma wasn't sure how Ayanna would feel about the match, but if marrying Samuel was the way to bring her back, then it was worth trying. When Tahoma finally pulled into the town, it was dusk. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the kind of beauty he knew Ayana would appreciate. He found the cabin without much trouble, his heart pounding in his chest as he approached the front door. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin this conversation. He hadn't seen Ayana in over a year. What if she slammed the door in his face? What if she refused to listen? He took a deep breath and knocked. Ayana opened the door cautiously, not expecting anyone. Her eyes widened when she saw him standing there. Tahoma? Her voice was a mix of shock and disbelief. What are you doing here? He smiled, though it was laced with nervousness. I found you, Ayana. I couldn't let you stay away forever. Harper appeared behind Ayana, her eyes darting between the two siblings. Ayana stood still, frozen with emotion as Tahoma stepped forward and pulled her into a hug. I missed you, sis. Ayana hugged him back, but there was hesitation in her touch. I missed you too, but why are you here? How did you find me? I've been searching for a long time, Tahoma said, stepping back. I couldn't let you go without trying to bring you back home. Mom and Dad, they won't admit it, but they miss you. They're hurting, Ayana. They want you to come back. Ayana's face tightened. They miss me? Tahoma, they disowned me. They said they didn't have a daughter anymore. You were there. You know what they said. Tahoma sighed, running a hand through his hair. They're proud, yes. Stubborn, more than anyone I know, but they're still our parents. They made a mistake, and you know how hard it is for them to admit it. But I believe if you come back, apologize and apologize. Ayana's voice grew sharp, her eyes darkening with anger. Apologize for what? For loving who I love? For not fitting into their perfect plan for me? Tahoma, they didn't want me to be happy. They wanted me to be obedient. I know, Ayana, Tahoma said, lowering his voice. I know it's not fair, but this is the way things have been for generations. Our parents aren't bad people. They're just trying to protect you, even if it doesn't feel like it. They've arranged a marriage with Samuel. He's a good man. If you come back, they'll welcome you. They'll forgive everything, and you can start over. Ayana's stomach twisted. Samuel. The name of the man they wanted her to marry felt like a weight around her neck. I don't want to marry Samuel. I don't even know him. He's strong, respected, and he can give you a good life, Ayana. You could be happy. Harper, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, her eyes blazing with emotion. She is happy, Tahoma. She's happy with me. You don't get to come here and take that away from her. Tahoma looked at Harper, his expression softening slightly. I'm not trying to take anything away. But this, he gestured between them, this isn't what our family believes in. Our parents will never accept it. They don't have to accept it, Ayana said firmly. I'm not asking for their approval anymore. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to their expectations, and it nearly broke me. I won't go back to that. Ayana, Tahoma pleaded, you don't understand what it's like. You're struggling out here. I saw your car. I know things are hard. You don't have to live like this. You can come home. You can have your family again. Ayana's eyes filled with tears. But at what cost, Tahoma? My freedom? My happiness? If I go back, I'll have to give up Harper. I'll have to give up the life I've built. I can't do that. Not even for you. Tahoma's face fell. He could see the determination in her eyes, the resolve that nothing he said could break. He had hoped, in his heart, that she would realize the struggle wasn't worth it, that returning to the reservation and following their family's path would be easier than this fight. But he could also see the love between Ayana and Harper, something pure and real, something that defied everything he had been taught. For a long moment, Tahoma stood there, unsure of what to say. Then he spoke softly. "I just don't want to lose you. I don't want you to be alone." Ayana smiled through her tears. "I'm not alone, Tahoma. I have Harper. She's my family now." Harper reached for Ayana's hand, and Tahoma saw the strength in their bond, the quiet determination they shared. It wasn't something he could understand fully, but he could see that it was real. He sighed, defeated. "I'll talk to them. I'll try to make them understand, but I can't promise anything." Ayana nodded. "Thank you. But even if they don't come around, I'll still be okay. I'm not coming back." Tahoma gave her one last look, filled with love and sadness. "I'll always be your brother, no matter what." Ayana smiled, the tears still glistening in her eyes. "I know." They hugged once more, and then Tahoma left, the sound of his truck fading into the distance. As the door closed behind him, Harper turned to Ayana, her voice soft. "Are you okay?" Ayana nodded, but her heart ached. "I'll be okay. I just need time." They stood together in the quiet cabin, the future uncertain, but their love unwavering. No matter what obstacles came their way, from family, from strangers, from the world, they knew that together they could face it all. For now, they would stay in Alaska, but soon they would have to find another place. A place where they could live freely, where their love wouldn't be questioned, where they could finally be at peace. But wherever they went next, they would go together. And that was all that mattered. Breaking the Horizon. Part 5. 6 months in Alaska had passed like a blur. Life here had not been the fresh start Ayana and Harper had hoped for. The isolation and beauty of the land had initially seemed like a refuge, a place to build something new away from the judgment they faced back in Washington. But reality had quickly set in. Ayana had found a job at a Denny's, waitressing for minimum wage, often working late-night shifts that left her physically exhausted. She had a degree in environmental science, and Harper held a degree in psychology, but neither of their fields seemed to have openings in this small, remote town. Harper had managed to secure a job as a receptionist at a local doctor's office, answering phones and scheduling appointments, but the pay was barely enough to cover their rent and utilities. Their apartment was a small, one-bedroom unit in an aging building. The heater often broke down in the cold, and they were forced to huddle under blankets on freezing nights. The smell of damp carpet and mildew lingered no matter how many times they cleaned. Most days, they could barely afford to eat after paying the bills, scraping by on cheap groceries like ramen and canned beans. Their savings had dried up within the first few months, and they were now living paycheck to paycheck, barely making ends meet. As Ayana pulled on her apron and tied it around her waist for another shift at Denny's, she could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on her. The early morning shifts were grueling, and her feet constantly ached from hours spent rushing between tables, refilling coffee cups, and taking orders from impatient customers. Her dream of working with environmental conservation seemed like a distant memory, a part of a life that felt unreachable. At the doctor's office, Harper's days weren't much better. The monotony of filing paperwork, answering calls, and dealing with frustrated patients was far from what she had envisioned when she'd chosen to major in psychology. She had dreamed of helping people, of making a difference. But now, the only help she was offering was scheduling appointments and dealing with insurance claims. It was a far cry from the future she had imagined. One night, after another long day at work, Ayana returned home to find Harper already sitting on the couch, staring at the stack of bills on the coffee table. The tension in the room was thick, and Ayana could feel the strain between them. They had both been holding on as best they could, but their financial struggles were taking a toll on their relationship. "I checked our account earlier," Harper said, not looking up. "We're short for rent again. We'll have to dip into credit cards just to make it through the month." Ayana sighed, collapsing onto the couch next to her. "I know. I've been thinking maybe I should pick up a second job. There's a diner down the street looking for weekend help." Harper shook her head. "You're already working so much, Ayana. You're going to run yourself into the ground. We don't really have a choice, do we?" Ayana said, her voice tinged with frustration. "This isn't what we wanted, Harper. We came here to start over, but it feels like we're just sinking." Harper's face softened, and she reached over to take Ayana's hand. "I know. I feel the same way. But we're not sinking, we're just struggling. And we'll get through this." Ayana squeezed her hand, trying to find comfort in Harper's words, but the reality of their situation was overwhelming. "It feels like every time we try to get ahead, something knocks us back down. The bills, the rent, the jobs that barely pay enough. And it's not just that, it's this place, too. I feel like we're being watched, judged. I thought Alaska would be different, but it's not." Harper nodded. She had noticed the way some of the locals stared at them, the hushed whispers when they walked down the street together. While the town had initially seemed welcoming, it didn't take long for people to realize that Ayana and Harper weren't just roommates or friends. They were a couple. The prejudice they had hoped to escape was alive here, too. There had been moments where co-workers or neighbors made passive-aggressive comments, and the tension was starting to feel suffocating. "We came here for freedom," Harper said quietly, "but it's like we're running into the same walls, just in a different place." Ayana looked at her, her heart heavy with the weight of their shared struggles. "Do you ever regret it? Coming here?" Harper shook her head immediately. "No, not for a second. I regret how hard it's been, but I don't regret being with you. That's the one thing that keeps me going." Ayana felt a lump rise in her throat. She leaned in and kissed Harper's forehead gently. "Me too. I don't regret us. I never will." They sat there in silence for a long moment, the weight of their financial hardship and the lingering prejudice pressing in around them, but holding each other close. A few weeks later, things reached a breaking point. After a particularly rough shift, Ayana returned home to find an eviction notice taped to their door. They had fallen too far behind on rent, and their landlord had finally had enough. Ayana's stomach dropped as she pulled the paper from the door, her hands shaking. When Harper came home that night, Ayana handed her the notice without saying a word. Harper read it silently, her face pale. "What are we going to do?" Harper asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Ayana said, her voice breaking. "I don't know, Harper. We've tried everything. We're stuck." Harper wrapped her arms around Ayana, tears welling in her eyes. "We'll figure it out. We'll figure something out." But deep down, they both knew they were running out of options. Their dream of starting over in Alaska was crumbling around them, and soon, they wouldn't even have a place to call home. They spent that night searching online for jobs and apartments in other cities. Maybe Anchorage, maybe back in Washington. They were willing to go anywhere at this point, as long as they could escape the cycle of debt and judgment that had followed them to Alaska. Ayana thought of her brother, Tahoma, and wondered if returning to the reservation would be the answer. But then she remembered the expectations, the arranged marriage, the life her family had mapped out for her, and she knew she could never go back. Not like that. As they lay in bed that night, holding each other, Ayana whispered into the darkness, "We'll make it through this. We've come this far. We'll find a way." Harper held her tighter, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. "We will. Together." Their future was unknown, filled with more challenges than they could see, but their love remained their only constant. No matter how far they had to go, or how much more they had to fight, they would continue to face it side by side. Breaking the Horizon, Part 6. After weeks of uncertainty, Harper stumbled upon a lifeline when scrolling through LGBTQ+ forums online late one night. The financial strain and their constant search for a stable place had pushed her to seek comfort in online spaces, hoping to find solidarity among others facing similar struggles. In her search, she found more than that: a local LGBTQ+ group in Alaska that was actively networking, offering resources, and even job opportunities for queer individuals looking to build a community. One post in particular caught her eye. A small local newspaper was hiring an editor, and they were specifically looking for someone familiar with LGBTQ+ issues and activism. Harper's heart skipped a beat. This could be exactly what she and Ayana needed: a steady job, a community, and a chance to fight for the very things they'd been struggling with. The next morning, Harper rushed to tell Ayana. She held up her phone, excitement lighting up her tired eyes. "Look, I think I found something, an editing job for a local paper. It's not much, but they're looking for someone who understands LGBTQ+ issues. It's perfect, right?" Ayana, still groggy from another sleepless night, looked at her skeptically. "A job? Here? Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Harper smiled, her voice hopeful for the first time in weeks. "And the best part? They're connected with an LGBTQ+ group here in Alaska. We could finally have some community. People who get us. We wouldn't be alone." Ayana sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. She had always admired Harper's tenacity, the way she never gave up, even when things seemed impossible. But Alaska had taken its toll on both of them, and the idea of finding support within the community had felt distant, like a dream they couldn't quite reach. But now, with Harper's discovery, hope flickered again. "That sounds amazing," Ayana said, trying to let herself believe it could work. "You think they'd hire you?" Harper nodded, her determination shining through. "I've got experience from editing for the school paper at WSU, and I know my way around writing. I think they'll give me a shot. It's worth trying, right?" Ayana smiled weakly, grateful for Harper's persistence. "You're right. It's worth trying." The next week, Harper sent in her resume, and to her surprise, the newspaper contacted her almost immediately for an interview. The job wasn't glamorous. The newspaper mainly focused on local issues and small stories, but they wanted to expand their coverage to include LGBTQ+ perspectives, something the community was sorely lacking. The interview went well, and within a week, Harper was offered the position. For the first time in months, things seemed to be looking up. Harper threw herself into the work, editing articles on local events, crafting opinion pieces about LGBTQ+ rights, and even contributing to a new column on queer culture in Alaska. The job didn't pay much, but it was steady, and more importantly, it gave her purpose again. Through her work at the paper, Harper began connecting with the local LGBTQ+ network, attending events, and meeting people who had also faced discrimination and hardship similar to theirs. Harper's involvement in the community started to create a ripple effect in their lives. She brought home information about support groups, legal advice for LGBTQ+ couples, and even housing resources for those struggling, like Ayana and herself. It felt like they were finally starting to dig themselves out of the hole they'd been stuck in. However, as they became more involved in the local LGBTQ+ scene, the pushback they faced from parts of the community in Alaska only intensified. The more vocal they became, the more they were noticed, and not always in a good way. One evening, as Ayana waited for Harper to return from the office, she glanced at the messages they'd received online. There were a few from the LGBTQ+ network, offering advice and support, but there were also several hateful comments from locals who had discovered Harper's column. The words were harsh, accusing them of bringing city problems to the rural, traditional land of Alaska. Ayana's chest tightened as she read the hateful messages. She had faced rejection before, from her family, from her tribe, but this felt different. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was hers and Harper's together. And the pressure from both the financial strain and now the social rejection was beginning to weigh heavily on her. When Harper came home, Ayana showed her the messages, her voice tense. "I knew people would talk, but this feels like more than just talk. I don't know how much more of this I can take, Harper." Harper read the messages, her face hardening with every word. She had always been strong, but this attack on them, their love, and their existence in Alaska cut deeper than she wanted to admit. Still, she tried to stay calm. "We knew it wouldn't be easy," Harper said softly. "But we're not alone anymore. We have the network now. We have support. We're not going to let this drive us out, Ayana." Ayana sighed, running her fingers through her long black hair. "I know. But it feels like no matter where we go, we face the same battles. What if it's not enough? What if we can't find a place where people accept us?" Harper sat down beside her, taking Ayana's hand in hers. "Then we make our own place. We carve out a life for ourselves. No one else gets to tell us how to live." Ayana leaned into Harper's embrace, the weight of the last few months pressing on her chest. She wanted to believe Harper, to trust in the future they were building, but the strain of constantly fighting against family, against society, and even against themselves was beginning to take its toll. Still, with Harper's job giving them a sense of stability, they pushed forward. Ayana kept working long shifts at Denny's, but she began saving every penny she could. Harper's paychecks, though small, helped them cover rent, and with the support of the LGBTQ+ network, they started to feel less alone. Yet, the whispers of rejection and the barriers they had faced their whole lives still lingered in the background, always threatening to pull them down. One night, after another long shift at Denny's, Ayana and Harper sat on their worn-out couch, discussing what the future held. Ayana looked at Harper, the woman she loved more than anything in the world, and said, "What if we keep running into this everywhere we go? What if we never find a place where we belong?" Harper looked back at her, determination in her eyes. "Then we'll keep running until we do. Because I'd rather keep searching with you than settle for a life where we have to hide who we are." Ayana nodded, her heart swelling with love for Harper. They had faced so much already, and there was no doubt that more challenges lay ahead. But as long as they had each other, they knew they could keep moving forward, even if they had to take it one step at a time. The future remained uncertain, but for now, they held on to the hope that their love could withstand whatever hardships came next. Together, they would fight for the life they wanted, even if it meant defying every expectation placed upon them. As Harper leaned in and kissed Ayana, they both knew one thing for sure. They weren't giving up. Not now, not ever. Breaking the Horizon. Part 7, A New Beginning. The days in Alaska grew colder, but Ayanna and Harper's life began to warm with the stability they'd worked so hard to build. The constant struggle seemed to be behind them as things finally fell into place. One afternoon, after another long day of work, Ayanna burst through the door with a grin that lit up her entire face. "I got it, Harper. I got the job at the zoo," she exclaimed, waving a small piece of paper in her hand. Harper looked up from her laptop, her eyes wide with excitement. "Wait, seriously? The research position?"
"Yes."
"They want me to work in the botany division, helping with plant research and conservation projects," Ayanna explained, barely able to contain her excitement. "I'll be studying native Alaskan plants and how they can thrive in different climates." Harper jumped up and hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you. You've worked so hard for this." For the first time in a long while, Ayanna felt truly at peace. The job at the zoo meant she could finally work in her field, using her degree and passion for plants to make a real difference. It wasn't just a job, it was a new beginning, and the stability they had dreamed of was finally within reach. With Harper continuing her work at the local newspaper, their financial situation started to improve. They no longer had to stretch every dollar just to make it through the month. They finally had a little breathing room, and it felt like they were building a life they could be proud of. But as life settled into a more comfortable rhythm, something unexpected happened. One evening, after a quiet dinner at their small apartment, Harper's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced down at it and saw an unfamiliar number. Opening the message, her eyes widened. "It's from my mom," she said softly, showing Ayanna the screen. "She says she's been thinking about us and wants to talk." Ayanna's heart skipped a beat. "Do you think she wants to reconcile?" "I'm not sure," Harper said, her voice full of emotion. "But she said she's sorry for how things went down and that she wants to try to reconnect." Ayanna nodded, feeling a mix of relief and hesitation. "Maybe it's time we talk to them. We've been through so much, and if they're willing to make amends." The next day, Ayanna's phone buzzed too. It was a message from her brother, the same brother who had tried to convince her to return to the reservation and marry the man her parents had chosen. This time, though, his tone was different.
"Hey, sis.
Mom and Dad want to see you. They miss you. We all do. We've been thinking about everything, and I know we've made mistakes. We just want to know if you're okay and if we can talk." Ayanna read the message aloud to Harper, her voice trembling slightly. The wounds from her family's rejection had run deep, but now, for the first time since they'd left, they were reaching out. "What do you think?" Harper asked gently. "Do you want to see them?" Ayanna stared at her phone for a long moment before finally answering. "Yes, I think I do. But I'm not ready to just go back and act like nothing happened. We need to talk. They need to understand who I am and who we are together." Harper nodded in agreement. "We'll do this together, Ayanna." Over the next few weeks, Harper and Ayanna exchanged messages with their families. The conversations were awkward at first, full of apologies and misunderstandings that needed to be addressed. Both Harper's mom and Ayanna's parents expressed regret for the way they had treated their daughters, admitting that their prejudices and fears had clouded their judgment. They missed their daughters and wanted to make amends. Finally, a visit was arranged. Both Harper's mother and Ayanna's parents would come to Alaska to see them. There was still a lot to work through, but the fact that both families were willing to reach out and try was a start. On the day of the visit, Harper and Ayanna waited nervously in their cozy apartment. The doorbell rang, and for a moment, Neither of them moved. "Ready?" Harper asked, her voice steady. Ayana took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." When they opened the door, Harper's mom stood there with tears in her eyes. Behind her were Ayana's parents, looking older and wearier than she remembered, but their expressions were soft, not angry. Harper's mom hugged her tightly, whispering, "I'm so sorry, honey. I've missed you so much." Ayana's parents were more hesitant, but after a long moment, her mother stepped forward and gently placed her hand on Ayana's arm. "We've been so wrong, Ayana. We thought we were doing what was best for you, but we were wrong. Please forgive us." Ayana swallowed the lump in her throat, tears welling in her eyes. "I've missed you too," she whispered, finally hugging her parents. They spent the afternoon together, talking through the hurt, the regrets, and the future. Both families offered financial help, but Ayana and Harper politely declined. They had worked so hard to build their lives together, and while they appreciated the gesture, they didn't need it anymore. They had each other, and they had built something strong. "We're okay now," Harper said with a smile. "We've got jobs we love, a home we've made, and most importantly, we have each other." Ayana nodded, holding Harper's hand. "We've come a long way, and we're finally where we want to be. We're happy." By the time the visit ended, there was still work to be done, but it felt like a fresh start. Their families might not fully understand everything, but they were trying, and that was enough for now. As Ayana and Harper stood at the door, waving goodbye to their families, they turned to each other, a sense of peace settling over them. "Can you believe it?" Ayana said softly. "We made it." Harper smiled, squeezing Ayana's hand. "We did. And no matter what happens next, we'll keep making it. Together." The sun began to set over the Alaskan horizon, casting a warm, golden light over their small home. For the first time in a long time, Ayana and Harper felt truly at peace. They had faced rejection, hardship, and doubt, but they had also found love, community, and purpose. And now, standing side by side, they knew they could face whatever came next together.